When Zuko saw what Zhao was up to, he felt his temper flare. He stepped between Zhao and his intended target. In a training fight, Zuko would have divided Zhao's blast neatly in half and redirected the flames to go past him on both sides. As it was, Zuko was surrounded by bystanders, which made redirecting the force of the blow a potential catastrophe for anyone unlucky enough to be standing too near. Instead, Zuko was forced to use a more powerful block to dissipate the blast. Zuko could feel the intense heat of the assault with every hair on his face and arms, the last wisp of flame barely visible when Zhao got his head around the sudden change in the situation. Looks of disbelief and anger crossed the man's face before he settled on an irritated glare. "Prince Zuko, what on earth are you doing?" A good question, Zuko thought and took a deep breath. His bending stance did not waver. Zuko had made his choice and had no intention of backing down now. "It's over, Zhao. The Avatar isn't here. You have no proof that he ever was, or that these people helped him escape. I will not let you make the villagers pay for your failure to capture the Avatar. You should take your men and return to your ship and go." Zhao was enraged. "You are an exile, such a weak failure that even your father doesn't want you in his sight. You do not give orders to me." "Maybe it's time you and I settle our differences once and for all," Zuko growled, feeling oddly calm considering he just challenged an older and more experienced firebender to an Nagne Kai. Meanwhile, on top of a nearby building, 4 figures and a lemur were huddled together behind a decorative tapestry, which completely blocked them from the Fire Nation soldiers' line of sight. "We've got to do something," Aang said, his voice worried but determined. 3 hours earlier. "Admit it," Katara said, rolling her eyes. "Admit what?" Sokka asked without lifting his gaze from the map sprawled before him. He and Katara were sitting in Appa's saddle. Aang was at the reins, but paying attention to the conversation. They had been flying over a scenic mountain view all morning. The glamour of the grand vista had with time gotten pretty old to Sokka's liking. "You have no idea where we are on that map," Katara said, and peered over her brother's shoulder to get a better look at the scroll in question. "That's not true," Sokka protested. "I'm pretty sure we are not here," he said, pointing to a place on the map. "Because if we were, we'd probably still see the Ugnai waving at us in the horizon." "Wouldn't that be nice? We could go ask Suki for directions. That is, if your ego could handle asking help from a girl," Katara rebuked. "Hey, I learned my lesson. Girls can fight too," Sokka said. "Though I wouldn't mind seeing Suki again. I had hardly any time to say goodbye when you guys suddenly decided we had to go in a hurry." "It was due time for us to continue our journey if we ever intend to reach the North Pole," Katara answered determinedly. What is she not saying, Sokka thought, is that it was due time we did what she wanted us to do? Namely, get Aang away from the hordes of his admirers, making him take his responsibilities as the Avatar more seriously. Sokka had to admit Katara had sort of succeeded. Sure, it had taken King Bumi and his crazy task to get Aang to stop fooling around wherever he went, but it had been thanks to Katara's little plan to help Haru that their group had gotten their first real opportunity to kick some Fire Nation butt. Although Aang was a monk and a pacifist, it was his job as the Avatar to help them defeat the Fire Nation. The sooner he got used to the idea, the better. "There's a village down there," Aang, always the first to notice things, pointed out. "Maybe we should ask them." "A village, huh?" Sokka peered at the map one last time, looking for a village in the vicinity of the area he thought they were in, but had to admit defeat. "Fine, let's go there." It was early morning, and the streets of the small port town were almost nearly deserted. Zuko walked down a narrow street, hurrying back to his ship. Officially, the region belonged to the Earth Kingdom, but luckily it wasn't particularly hostile toward Fire Nation ships, small and without troops or their defenses. The town had no choice but to allow just about any ship to enter its bay. Earth Kingdom leading generals had classified this port and the surrounding mountain as a region not worth fighting for. It sounded harsh, but Zuko understood that all sides had to prioritize which targets were more valuable to their nation's war effort. The land here was hard and rocky with plenty of mountains and few inhabitants and crops. Thus the area had little importance to its kingdom and they had left it for the Fire Nation. Ironically, the Fire Nation had no more use for the region than the Earth Kingdom did. The area could not be used as a secret backdoor to Amashu, as the War Council had once suggested, because not even the Fire Nation could establish practical supply lines to the mountains. So the Fire Nation had not bothered to officially invade or occupy the area. They too could not afford to waste troops on an insignificant target. All in all, most of the region had ended up becoming a no man's land, where anyone who had the muscle to be the local authority was. Knowing this, Zuko put on his tough face when walking through the town. When traveling in the Earth Kingdom, anonymity usually was a good way to avoid unnecessary fights. But in shady ports like this one, Zuko preferred to wear his Fire Nation uniform. It served to inform anyone looking for trouble on the level of trouble they were encountering should they pick a fight with him. Zuko's ship came into view, looking pathetic as usual. The fact that this particular port had no other Fire Nation vessels to compare it to helped a little, but the ship still looked old and sad. It was by no means a ship for nobility, let alone the Prince of the Fire Nation, but Zuko had long ago stopped expecting to be treated like one. A man without honor, prince or not, was nothing. But that would all change once he captured the Avatar. First, he had to find the boy. One of the hardest things about tracking the Avatar was that Zuko had no idea what the boy's plan was. Originally, he presumed the air nomad was heading north. The Avatar had, after all, promised to take Katara to the Northern Water Tribe to learn waterbending, and since they were still traveling together, Zuko had assumed that was their plan. Now, however, the prince had been tracking the airbender and his Water Tribe companions for weeks, and had nothing more to show for his troubles than the Avatar's staff and a Water Tribe necklace he found on the remains of a prison rig. Zuko was constantly one step behind them, and for that he blamed Zhao and the man's endless attempts to slow him down at every turn. In many ports like Kyoshi Island, Zuko had missed the Avatar by mere hours. The Earthbender prison rig he had visited the other day had still been on fire. Nothing Zuko had learned of the Avatar's movements so far suggested the Airbender was heading to the North Pole, or any other particular destination. His seemingly random movements were next to impossible to predict. But now, finally, Zuko had managed to get a reliable tip on the Airbender's whereabouts, and if the information held true, the Avatar wasn't far, which meant the prince was in a hurry to tell Lieutenant G and the rest of his crew about their new heading. Zuko marched up the ramp to his ship. A helmsman on guard duty was sitting on a barrel. Not bothering with pleasantries, Zuko cut to the chase. "I need to speak with Lieutenant G. Where is he?" The helmsman startled, clearly not having heard Zuko approach. Zuko felt his temper flare. Zuko's natural stride was rather stealthy, but a guard should be on alert. "I'm surrounded by incompetents. What if I've been an attacker? Then what?" Zuko felt like letting the man hear it. In fact, he had felt like shouting at every member of his crew for every little thing they went wrong ever since they had so callously betrayed him to Zhao a few weeks earlier. So far, he had attempted to restrain himself, as Uncle had many times advised him to do. Because Iroh had a point. In his current situation, Zuko was stuck with the crew he had, whether he was pleased with them or not. Also, they had been hard-working and loyal crew for most of the 3 years they'd been served under him. In all honesty, his crew was also the closest thing Zuko had to friends. This particular helmsman didn't deserve to have all of Zuko's wrath taken out on him. Therefore, instead of yelling at the soldier, Zuko set off crossing his arms and eyeing the man with irritation until he recovered enough to realize he was being addressed by his superior. Finally, the soldier managed to hastily bow and replied, "Prince Zuko, I didn't hear you coming." "Obviously." "Lieutenant G is at the ship's bridge, sir." Zuko nodded and dismissed the soldier. He headed up the stairs toward the ship's navigation room. They could not afford to stall. The Avatar had been sighted 2 clicks into the mainland heading north, and if the word of his whereabouts were spreading fast enough to reach Zuko, odds were Zhao was onto the boy as well. Commander Zhao had hundreds of warships under his command, and one of them had just informed him that the Avatar's bison had just been sighted in a Hati village. "Well, well, well. I knew you couldn't hide from me forever." Aang had been a tad overwhelmed by the warm welcome they received from the villagers. "Avatar Aang, it's such an honor to have you as our guest." The town's mayor thanked them for the 3rd time for having shown up. "Well, it's good to be here," Sokka said awkwardly, and added more quietly to Aang and Katara, "Wherever here is." Aang frowned. "How did you know I'm the Avatar?" "Why, we recognized you, of course. You have heard much about the good deeds you have done for our kingdom. You are an inspiration to us all," the mayor continued, praising their heroics. He was a man in his 70s with a gray beard. The man's looks and attitude reminded Aang a bit of his elders from his home temple, and this made Aang like the man already. It shouldn't be too hard to get these people to help us on our quest to save the world, Aang thought. It felt good to be appreciated, too. True to their word, the villagers agreed to help them the best they could. They showed Sokka where they were on the map and provided them with supplies. The village was poor and remote, so they didn't have enough grains to feed Appa, but Aang could send the bison to explore the mountains and forage for himself. Aang felt sad watching Appa go. The monk knew he was being childish when he wanted to keep the bison constantly at his side so that he had a way to take off whenever he felt like it. Ever since he lost his glider, Aang had felt so very earthbound, and he didn't like it one bit. The people of Kyoshi Island had been kind enough to give him a pair of fans to fight with. But there were things you could do with an air staff that fans didn't help with. Flying was one of them. Aang had tried. Hushed voices whispered all around him. There was some kind of commotion going on, and the crowd was curious spectators surrounding Aang, Sokka, and Katara, made way for a new group of people. Avatar Aang, what a fortunate thing we are to meet! A tall and broad-shouldered man in his 30s greeted him. The man was dressed in traditional Earth Kingdom greens and a bright green wristband on his left wrist. He was leading a group of 10 people and they were all wearing the same wristbands. The bands had an insignia on them, but Aang didn't recognize it. My name is Shin, and I am the leader of the Earth Kingdom militia, the leader of the group continued. The what now? Sokka blurted out. Shin didn't appear to take offense. The man smiled a calm and confident smile as he went on. I'm not certain you've heard of us, but it's truly a blessing we are to run into each other. My militia is, after all, fighting the same fight as you are, and I believe it would be in everyone's best interest for us to coordinate our actions. You're also fighting the Fire Nation? Katara asked. That's great! Just the other day we were telling these earthbenders who are imprisoned by the Fire Nation they should fight for their homes. Shin smiled at Katara. Yes, so we hear. It was very brave of you, and you were right to do so. Every man, woman, and child in this kingdom should be ready to fight for their homes. So know this, you are not alone in your quest for justice. We, the citizens of the Earth Kingdom, are ready to fight for our rights. The oppression has lasted far too long, but now that the Avatar has returned, my militia and I are ready to stand behind you and you get the wrongs of the world right. Did you hear that? Katara asked enthusiastically, turning to speak to Aang and Sokka. Aang smiled back at her. This was good news. It's good to meet you all, Aang said and bowed to Shin and his men. Shin bowed back and went on. I'm glad we have an understanding. Now it would be my honor to invite you to join me and my men for dinner. Afterwards we can discuss the specific plans each of us has for the future. A dinner? Now we're talking, Sokka pitched in. The food was so good it made Sokka feel envious of all the things the Earth Kingdom could grow. Half of these things would never last on the poles, and sometimes even a devout carnivore had to admit that these vegetables were tasty. He had to give the militia some credit for being hospitable hosts and offering a good meal before talking business. It would be easier to focus on war planning with a full stomach. Sokka, Katara, and Aang and the militiamen and some of the villagers had gotten into a large wooden dining hall. The sleazy mayor had called it the city hall. During the meal, the Avatar and his group learned more about the militia. It turned out to be an organization consisting mostly of ordinary Earth Kingdom citizens who wanted help with the war, and it was led by Shin and his trusted men. Listening to the militiamen joke among themselves reminded Sokka of his father, Koda, and how the men of his tribe acted together. He had a good feeling about this. The dinner was about over and Shin looked like he was ready to start the talks. So Avatar Aang, what do you intend to do first as the Avatar? Aang exchanged looks with the Water Tribe siblings. Sokka gave him an encouraging nod. Well, the thing is, I haven't really mastered all 4 elements yet, Aang answered honestly. In fact, I only know airbending, so first we're going to travel to the Northern Water Tribe to learn waterbending. Sounds reasonable, Shin agreed. What about after you master the elements? What do you do then? Aang is going to stop the Fire Nation, of course. Sokka answered on Aang's behalf. Yes, of course. Do you already have a plan on how to accomplish that? Shin wondered. Again, their team exchanged looks with Aang and replied, no, not really. But we still have plenty of time to think of something, Sokka added, not wanting to sound like they were just aimlessly drifting around. which was actually pretty much what they were doing so far. Shin smiled at him and nodded. But I am to understand that you are not opposed to the idea of taking part in fighting even before you reach your other goals? Well, sure, Sokka said, and shrugged. I mean, we kind of can't avoid it, with the Fire Nation trying to capture Aang and all. Plus, it's about time someone showed these Fire Nation scum that they don't get to do whatever they want and get away with it. Indeed, all those who mean to sustain the unjust structures of the world should be held accountable, Shin affirmed. That's a way of putting it. Okay, so what about you guys? Do you have some kind of plan? Sokka asked in turn. Now it was Shin's turn to exchange looks with his men before answering. We too have already begun our fight against the oppressing class in many Earth Kingdom counties. For example, in this region, we have confiscated Fire Nation supplies, and with the profits gained from these supplies, we have found new schools to replace the ones that were destroyed in the war, or were never built in the first place despite the population growth. Shin looked to one of his trusted men, a slim guy who was about the same age as the leader. The other men nodded and continued for him. Indeed, organizing public education available for everyone is one of our main goals. The state of the current school system is appalling, and we haven't been able to achieve as much as we would like in the area. But our movements gain new members each day, and even the official legislators can no longer keep ignoring us. Quick question. What do schools have to do with defeating the Fire Nation? Sokka had asked, even at risk of sounding stupid. Right now in our kingdom, only the wealthy can get an education. It has always been this way, but times are changing, and the Earth Kingdom has to change with them. I would go as far as to say the lack of education is one of the simple greatest concerns of our country, since it limits the opportunity the poor have to improve their station, Shin answered. His voice got a new layer of passion in it as he went on. When only the ruling class gets an education, they will always remain the ruling class. When only a handful of rich and influential noble families have all the power in the land, nothing will ever change. For 100 years, this war has taken its toll, especially on the poor living in the countryside. Many farmers have had to leave their homes and become refugees, and without any other knowledge than how to grow crops, they have little chance of attaining wealth in a city. How can our country ask us to die for it when it gives us nothing in return? Now Shin was really getting fired up. The members of the militia around him were nodding their heads. Shin banged his fist on the table to emphasize his agitation. In our kingdom's current state, it is not a kingdom worth fighting for. Therefore, we demand change, and we demand it now. The last part got some of the men shouting small whoops. I understand what you're saying, Katara put in, thoughtful, but shouldn't getting rid of the Fire Nation be your first priority? It has been our kingdom's first and only priority for 100 years, but even a war does not excuse 100 years without social change. If we don't make something happen now, we never will. Suddenly Aang, who had been pretty quiet up to this point, shot up from his seat. But you are Earth Kingdom. You're supposed to be stable and conservative, like your element. You're not supposed to rebel. Even the stablest of rocks will rumble when pushed hard and long enough, Shin replied, his gaze unwavering. Aang waved his hands in the air as if trying to grasp some invisible thread of logic. But you're supposed to be patient. You're supposed to be about tradition. Sokka didn't like the look the militiamen were giving Aang. Okay, Aang seriously needs to stop telling Earth Kingdom people what they're supposed to be like, Sokka thought nervously. Children on Earth are all about their traditions, Shin agreed, but if those traditions no longer serve the people, we should create new ones. If our leading generals no longer work for all of our kingdoms, but only for the people living in the mid-cities, they should be replaced. Quick question. If the army, which is being led by the current generals, doesn't want new ones, then what? Sokka asked, although he had a feeling he already knew the answer. Then they will be placed by force, Shin replied solemnly. But more fighting won't solve anything. Aang was almost pleading. And you can't fight your own countrymen. There will be change. Shin, too, was on his feet now. We will be heard, even if we have to knock down the great walls of Ba Sing Se ourselves and demand an audience with the Earth King. We could start with King Bumi, another militiaman added. Omashu is much closer, and they have been helping the surrounding countries almost as little as Ba Sing Se has. Oh great, now there'll be no stopping Aang. To prove Sokka right, Aang almost yelled. You can't attack a Washu! King Bumi is a great ruler! The militiaman was starting to give Aang annoyed looks, and Sokka decided he had to intervene. Look, Aang, I get what you're saying, but let's cut them some slack here. After all, we don't know much about how King Bumi or the Earth Kingdom actually rule their people. It might also be a matter of public appearance. At least to me, Bumi didn't come across as the most sane leader of all time. I mean, I suppose you know him better than we do, then again, you weren't the one who was almost suffocated because of Madman's whim. Aang turned to look at Sokka with innocent surprise on his face. I'm sure he wouldn't have let that happen. I'm sure he wouldn't have, but Sokka is right, Katara said, surprising even Sokka. Ever since Aang had come along, she has pretty much systematically taken his side in arguments, acting like the Avatar could do no wrong. Now she went on, if their chief isn't doing his job well, they should elect a new one. Exactly, Shin said to Katara. But the Earth Kingdom is much bigger than your tribe, and you're not as unanimous. How could they even elect a leader even half the kingdom would be pleased with? Aang started to sound desperate. Look, guys, Aang continued, I understand that you're upset, but this is a bad idea. If the Earth Kingdom doesn't stand united against the Fire Nation, how can you win this war? Excuse me, but I was under the impression that it was the Avatar's job to stop the Fire Nation, Shin said coolly. Utter silence followed. Traveling in the area where the Earth Kingdom militia was known to be active had its risk, but today Zuko had no choice but to take his chances with the ragtag resistance movement. The prince had no time to waste if he intended to reach the Avatar before Zhao did. Zuko hadn't taken his crew along. He knew how to move in a hurry without raising too many eyebrows, but his crew wasn't as stealthy, and whatever value a few extra hands would have provided in a fight was meaningless if they arrived too late or tipped the Avatar off too early. That was why Zuko had brought only Uncle along. About halfway to the village the Avatar was reportedly in, they ran across some fresh footprints. Fire Nation troops had gone this way not more than half an hour ago. Zuko knew in his heart that they were Zhao's men. Well, at least I no longer have to worry about accidentally tipping the Avatar off that the Fire Nation is onto him. If the monk had known Zhao's small army heading his way, he's busted already. And what would I do then? Zuko didn't complete that line of thought. A young woman wearing militia wristband burst into the city hall. 3 Fire Nation ships just anchored in Hatta Bay, and troops are on their way here. We'll have company in 15. Shin got up and started handing out orders to his men. He turned to the Avatar. We will finish this conversation later, but now you and your friends have to hide. No, if the Fire Nation is attacking your village, we are not going to run and hide. We will stay here and help you fight them, Katara said. We appreciate the gesture, but you are staying to fight and it's the last thing we need. The Fire Nation coming here is either to find us or you, maybe both. The best thing for the village is that they find neither of us here, Shin explained. There is no time for the militia to evacuate back to our base, so we must hide as well. The militia can do that by taking off our wristbands, but you have to go underground. Illa here is a bender. She'll create a hiding place for you. All 3 children started to argue simultaneously, but Shin raised a hand and continued. You can fight, so can the militia, but even if we win, the Fire Nation might return to retaliate on the village. The best thing for everyone is that they find none of us here. Fine, Aang said. But we're not going underground, Sokka added. We need to be hiding somewhere where we can monitor the situation, in case something goes wrong. Shin didn't look pleased, but he turned to Illa. The girl thought for a moment and smiled. I've got the perfect place in mind. Follow me. Where is the Avatar? Where are you hiding him? Zhao's patience was running thin. He and his men had searched the village from top to bottom and had so far found no evidence of the Avatar's presence. No doubt the air nomad had either fled or these peasants were hiding him. Either way, the commander knew who to blame. So be it, Zhao said calmly and turned to his men. Burn the village, all of it. A young Earth Kingdom man took a step forward and shouted, We're not afraid of you! A vicious smile crossed Zhao's lips. He would personally test this insolent young man a thing or two about respect. The village did not take him seriously, but they would after this. Zhao turned and launched a two-handed fist blast toward the youngster. Zuko and Uncle had entered the village unnoticed. The commotion caused by Zhao's search ensured no one had given a second thought to two more people in Fire Nation uniforms. Zuko had intended to conduct a search of his own after Zhao had left, but now that was off the table. Is he mad? This was exactly the kind of behavior that gave all Fire Nation a bad name, and a commander. Zhao should have led by example. On a more personal note, it was just plain wrong to hand out punishments arbitrarily like that. Zuko felt a bit like a hypocrite for thinking that way. Since he was in Zhao's shoes, he too had threatened the villagers. There was absolutely no doubt that the Avatar had been here after all. But Zuko had not gone through with his threats. He would not have attacked the villagers unless they specifically stand between him and his quarry. Mouthing off isn't that serious an offense, Zuko thought with a cringe. When Zhao turned around and attacked a random bystander, Zuko made his decision. Consequences aside, he'd be damned before he let this happen.